Hello and welcome to Deep Blue Sea, the podcast. I'm your host, Jay Cluett, and on this show, myself and my regular co-host, Mark Hoffmeyer, have gone through the Deep Blue Sea trilogy scene by scene. We're now looking at some Deep Blue Sea adjacent films, sometimes with Mark, sometimes without, and this week is not quite a Mark free week. It's a regular Mark free week, but we'll find out what that means in a minute. So Mark is not here this week, but we're talking about Deep Blue Sea adjacent films. What does that mean? Well, that is films directed by Rennie Harlin, featuring sharks or aquatic action, and this week is an aquatic action film. So we're talking about Airport 77. I know what you're thinking. This isn't Con Air, the podcast. This isn't Con Air adjacent films. You said you weren't going to do that. You're not doing that, and we're not doing that. This is the airport film in which they end up underwater for a little bit. So that's why we're talking about Airport 77, and I need a couple of guests who are big fans of at least one film in the franchise. We'll find out if it's more than that. I don't know. But from the Airport Minute podcast, we have Jim O'Kane and Mark Cerulli. Jim, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
So
it's good to get the team back together again. It's been a while, right?
So
years.
I've podcasted with Jim before. Jim was a guest on Con Air, and my Mark and I have been on parts of his podcasting projects for a few years now. This is my first time podcasting with you, Mark, so nice to meet you. Before we get into Airport 77, or indeed Deep Blue Sea, what was it the two of you decided to do Airport? Why did you pick Airport as your first project these many years ago?
I don't know if Mark wants to field that one, so I guess I made Mark get into it. I said I needed a co-host, and I've badgered. Mark has been my best man in more than one marriage, so I drag him into many of my adventures. So I said, Mark, we're doing a podcast, and we're going to do it about the 1970 airport film. And sure enough, he slogged through all 137 episodes. Yes. I think it was on and
didn't
on.
We do it? Wasn't it a 5-day-a-week thing?
Yes, every single day.
Yeah. So, I liked it so much I swore off podcasting after that. But I do anything with Jim. I'm great with coming in like this, no problem.
Yeah, the less prep, the better. It's just, but he does. Mark has a fantastic Rolodex of people he knows, and we wound up getting folks like Robert Hayes from Airplane, who always got his airplane movie confused with Airport, and I was more attuned to finding people who never knew they were supposed to be on a podcast, like the fellow that ran Minneapolis St. Paul's Airport, which is where Airport was actually filmed, and he's a real life Burt Lancaster. We had asked him at the time, what was it like finding out that you were going to be a real life Burt Lancaster, and he said, I don't know until 10 minutes ago when you told me. So
wow.
Yeah. Lots of fun times.
Very nice. Yes, you're I would say our podcast, or our Deep Blue Sea journeys, we mainly had fellow podcasters on, but you had a much more diverse range of guests, and I think that's led to a very interesting show, very different from most MXM projects. But you stopped at the first Airport. You didn't venture into the sequels. I know it's one of the written guidelines you have to follow, I guess, is when you start doing the sequels, you have to finish them in the MXM projects. But why didn't you venture into 75 and beyond?
I moved to South America and lived under an assumed name for a while.
Yeah, Mark was good for one, and someday I'll find the perfect partner for Airport 75. But really, I've already had the perfect partner for Airport, so someday we will get back. Because believe it or not,
we're going to do the Surviving the Game Minute. I hope. You know, the 1994 Ice-T movie that really needs to be peeled like an onion.
Yeah, someday we'll fit it all in there. It's just there's only so many days left in our lives, so.
Yes, right.
But if we do a Monday through Friday, I'm sure we could get them all finished.
Well,
it's
you could take the Deep Blue Sea approach, where we went scene by scene. So we had 35 episodes on the first film, and then there is a Deep Blue Sea 2 and a 3. We did 10 episodes on 2 and 3 on 11 on 3, which was a much easier to like. Deep Blue Sea 2. I had never seen it before we started this project. My co-host Mark wasn't a fan of it to start with. When we dug in and did 10 consecutive weeks on Deep Blue Sea 2, we are now fans of that very cheaply made, not great film. You find things to enjoy about it when you're just kind of making fun of it for 2.5
yeah. Well,
months.
as
By
you
the
know,
way, my apologies. I actually did see Deep Blue Sea. I'm
Oh,
just looking at the
fantastic.
poster artwork. I saw it when it came out
Well,
because I love those kind of movies.
let's get into that before we get into Airport 77 then. What Jim, I know you watched it for the first time preparation for this podcast. Thank you for that. And Mark, you've seen it before. So what did you think of Deep Sea for your first experience, Jim?
for my first experience, well, I do love the it looked like a sequel to me. That's the thing that was hitting me, is like, wow, this must have had a Deep Blue Sea 0 or something. But it was I do like these types of adventure movies where everything goes to hell, and what goes from plausible to slightly implausible to just absurdly ridiculous. That's the way that you should make movies like this. You can feel the rewrites in progress as they got further into the movie. So I do enjoy watching a movie getting. I don't know much about the background of this movie, but it just feels like it was being rewritten several times to get to the ending, and it just got sillier and sillier, which is just that's the most enjoyable part of it.
They did definitely rewrite the ending because initially Susan McAllister did survive the film.
Oh.
And audiences didn't like that because they saw her as the bad guy, so they had to kill her. There's a cut scene with her and Carter kissing. I think we did a whole episode on we found a guy who saw the original ending. It's not available anywhere. We found someone.
Nice, yeah, very nicely told story. I mean, it kind of turns into a haunted house movie, or
Yes.
just a variation of an Irwin Allen thriller. I think it reminded me in many ways of Poseidon Adventure.
Yeah, a film we have covered on this show.
Perfect.
and beyond the Poseidon Adventure, of course. But we haven't yet tackled Poseidon. We'll get there one day, but we haven't done Poseidon yet.
I still remember when the original Poseidon Adventure came out. Jim and I had a good laugh about Leslie Nielsen as the captain saying, "Oh my God," and then closing a sliding door as if that's going to help him from like 100-foot wave.
Well, every little helps, I guess. So speaking of disaster films of the 70s, let's get into Airport 77. So the Poseidon Adventure has a reputation for almost starting. No, Airport, sorry, has a reputation for starting the disaster movies. I always loved disaster films as a kid, mainly from watching the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno. Those are the two. Like I saw these two, and I therefore love this genre and didn't seek out any more. So about what was it, about 8 to 10 years ago, on another podcast I hosted, a friend of mine submitted the Airport franchise for our like voted on movie of the month segment, and it won. And that was when I discovered not only was there a film called Airport, there was a whole franchise based on them. And I bought the box set, watched them, and that was one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done. Is that 3 hour session that myself and 4 other regular guests on this show were all on, just talking about the exploits of Joe Petroni and everyone he encounters, and like so much so that my dog Murphy, the P in his name stands for Petroni, is based on that podcast. So I love these films, but haven't. This was my first time going back to any of them since then. It's not that's not through choice. That's just through time. Like there's so many other films, but I would have happily watched any of them. But very happy to revisit 77 for today. I'll give a little intro for any listeners who have stumbled upon this show but don't know Airport 77. You should go and listen to it, and then you should also watch. You should go and watch it. You should also go and watch the first Airport, and then listen to the Airport Minute podcast, which is a show that is excellent. So this one features an all-star cast from the 70s, as all of these kind of films tend to do. You've got Jack Lemmon, Lee Grant, Brenda Vaccaro, Joseph Cotten, Olivia de Havilland, James Stewart, George Kennedy, Darren McGavin, Christopher Lee, Robert Foxworth, Robert Hooks, Kathleen Quinlan, loads more people. Emmett Walsh is in there. I always happy to see Emmett Walsh. And the central crux of the film is there's a newfangled plane loaded with expensive artwork and wealthy guests on its way to a house that's been converted into an art museum kind of thing. Wouldn't you know it, the co-pilot and some of the people have smuggled themselves on board to take over the plane, nick all the prize goods, and in the process crash it into the water where it sinks, and they need to be helped, essentially. So that's the main plot. We'll go into more of it about then. But when did you guys see this in the cinema? Was this an opening day movie for you both? Oh.
Yeah, actually, for me, we may have seen this together, Mark. I can't remember if this was at the Cameo Theater in Brewster. I think we saw it there.
Did we? I can't. I mean, I spun through it before this, and
yeah, I remember. I remember going and being insanely disappointed that it wasn't as good as Airport 75, but 77 was
saying something.
Yeah. So Airport 75 was just a thrill for me. I think of our group of friends from high school, we quote Airport 75 more than most other movies. Just Charlton Heston leaning in and saying, "Climb, baby, climb."
So it's not. There's a stewardess flying the plane.
Yes.
Well, that's the whole thing about when we were growing up. All those iconic stars were still alive and working. You know, I mean, Charlton Heston was doing a movie every week. You know,
yeah,
the Omega Man, Soylent Green.
What was that Mummy movie that it was in? Remember that? I remember.
God.
There was
Revenge of the Mummy or something. I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, but hey, the reason that you see in the 70s when you're seeing all these older actors, people like Joseph Cotten and Olivia de Havilland, they all have to make, I think it was like $20,000 a year from shows just so that they would qualify for SAG, Screen Actors Guild hospitalization. So when you're seeing these old codgers and things in the movies, they're not doing it because of the art. It's because they gotta get their hospitalization paid for. It also explains, like Love Boat and Fantasy Island. They're available because it helps out with their insurance policies.
I mean, you have the same things today. That's why you got the strikes happening, because actors aren't able to earn enough to qualify for insurance. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the same old.
Well, you're talking to somebody that got a 1 cent residual check for a Hey Dude I wrote. So there's that.
Did you cash that check?
No, I didn't. I said I got to keep this as a laugh.
What would you say is the minimum amount you would cash? What if
25 cents? That would get my attention.
Okay. Fair enough.
You used to know. I think it was you that told me you knew somebody that used to send people checks. You'd send stars checks so they'd cash them and have their autograph on the back.
I heard. I can't remember who did that, but somebody did that.
Yeah,
somebody did.
Yeah, it's just.
But this is way pre-eBay, where now most stars they won't sign anything because they don't like if it winds up on eBay.
Wow, but those back in the day things. It was a lot more. I think you had a better chance of getting like a handwritten letter and things like that from a star back then, which was just kind of odd. I mean, we have friends who the part of New York that we lived in, we had people like John Updike living down the street and stuff like that, and you could go and knock on their door and ask them what it's like to do things. And we have friends that have done stuff like that.
Well, in 83 or 82, I sent a book, I think it was The Shining, to Stephen King up in Maine with a note saying, "Hey, I want to be a writer. Can you tell me?" And he actually signed the book and wrote a little note about his writing habits, which I think it's in storage somewhere.
Did he advise for more or less cocaine?
Yes.
That was a certain. Hey, but he was nice enough to write. I mean,
absolutely.
That's pretty amazing. Somebody at that level.
One of the folks we should talk about in this movie, among the constellation of stars in this movie, is the late wonderful Olivia de Havilland, who was friends with Mark.
Yeah.
And my granddaughter is her namesake, and just I have to tell you, she is every bit as kind a person as you'd ever want to know in a celebrity. Mark can tell you more about her.
Yes, please do.
What she was like.
Well, I got to meet her because my wife was the head of marketing for Technicolor, which was a French company, and I was doing their 100-year video, and I said, we talked to people like Rob Legato and Vittorio Storaro and Richard Edlund from Star Wars fame, and I said, why don't you interview the last surviving star of your biggest triumph, which was Gone with the Wind, and so we you put the word out. Somebody knew someone who knew her, and at first she said yes, and then we were all set to go to Paris, and then her assistant said, she's changed her mind. And, she was 99 years old, and I guess anything out of the ordinary, freaked her out a little. But we said, look, we're coming anyway. Can we just meet her and say hello? And she said yes. And we spent like 3 days having tea with her and chatting. And by the end of it, oh, yes, I'll do it. And she was just wonderful. She, just a lovely lady. And we knew her, for years until she passed. Lovely lady. And I think I did ask her something about Airport 77. And she talked about the water scene to me, just about all the rushing water, and it was cold. I think that's what she said.
Sounds about right. Yeah. I mean, I being a host of this podcast, I love the water scenes in this film. All of the kind of underwater and trying to get out of the plane and the water's rushing in. That's my bread and butter. I love that kind of stuff. So I'm happy to see all that in here. Yeah. So Olivia de Havilland, she plays one of the passengers. These are all kind of. She plays Emily Livingston. She plays. These are all like wealthy people who are generally useless in this kind of situation, apart from like Christopher Lee is the only useful guy in the crew, and then he's dispatched immediately. It was very odd seeing Christopher Lee playing a good guy. So I know him from Lord of the Rings, from Star Wars, from Man with the Golden Gun. Like I've never seen him play anybody.
He's the greatest Dracula.
The Wicker Man. Like the Wicker Man is the most positive character I've seen him play, and he's the main villain of the film.
Right.
So it was just I couldn't get past, like, he's saying these things. He's talking about being a philanthropist and doing charity work, and he's going to go rescue these people. Like, there's something else going on. He's just trying to escape.
He's got to be planning something. Yes.
Well, the fact that he was dispatched with a stake through the heart. I mean, that's no, I'm kidding. Okay. That did not.
Yeah, no, he did a fantastic death scene. I did like his bobbing about on the way out of the. Out of the fuselage there. He did a good, like, hanging in the water, just generally bobbing to the surface. You were expecting him to be just be a turncoat of some kind, or be in on the heist. But generally, well, Mark, you've met Christopher Lee.
You survived meeting Christopher Lee.
Well, I met him. I mean, look, he was an idol of mine, and the first time I met him was at Cubby Broccoli's memorial in London, and I said, I did a whole piece on Hammer. I used to work for Cinemax, and I said, I'll send it to you. Who's your manager? And he told me, and I didn't have a pen, and he goes, you're a writer and you don't have a pen. That amazing voice. And then years later, I met him at a opera store. He was a huge opera fanatic, and he was making an appearance, and I don't know how happy he was when I showed up with a Taste the Blood of Dracula still, but he signed it. And that's all that mattered.
Yeah. As long as you get the autograph, it's all right.
Well, actually, I reminded him of what he said, and he said, I said that, how rude of me. Just like that. I said that phrase, how rude of me.
You always hear they prefer people to come and talk to about their lesser known projects, so it's not always the same. So I'm sure, like, not everyone's coming to talk to him about the Blood of Dracula. Other Dracula films, certainly.
Well, if I had known anything about opera, he would have loved it, but...
Yeah, that's the trick with celebrities. If you know their secret desire, then you can get into it very, very long. I have a friend who was a Purdue alumni and wanted to talk to Neil Armstrong. And of course, everybody asked Neil Armstrong about moon landings, but what he wanted to talk to him about was designing aerostructures, which in his heart of heart, Neil Armstrong was an engineer before he was an astronaut. And so he went off on this long chat with him for about 45 minutes on designing aerostructures, and they never brought up the moon. So the longer they didn't talk about the moon, the more he talked to him. But intriguing on just understanding the psyche of some celebrities. I was trying to remember if this was Joseph Cotten's second to last, or I think he still did the hearse after this, but I think this might have been his swan song for big action films where he's actually doing something.
I'm on his page now. There's a lot of credits to scroll through. So he did do 77. Oh, that's TV. Okay. So yeah, after this, he had a bunch of stuff. He had Aspen, Last In, First Out, Caravans, Perfect Crime, Islands of the Fisherman.
Oh, that's right.
Wow.
He was in Caravans. I forgot about that.
He's of course in the 1979 The Concorde Affair. Nothing to do with Airport 79 Concorde.
Mm.
Wow.
But yeah, Hearst, Casino, Heaven's Gate. Yeah, he's in a few things.
Looking at this film, it reminds you of how ugly fabrics were back then. I mean, all the burnt orange and lime green. Are you kidding?
The shag rugs of every
Yeah.
Even the
and that was supposed to be the height of sophistication, right, on that plane.
Yeah.
When the passengers all pass out, one of the guys is wearing a light grey suit with red orange like slip-ons. That's just the worst trouser shoe combination I can imagine.
I do like the bit of trivia about the laser disc player that they this was like the I think it might have been the only production model on Earth at the time.
Well, it was one of a handful. Yeah.
Yeah, and they actually swiped it out of Lou Wasserman, who was the CEO of Universal. They swiped it out of his office and stuck it on the set. It's like, run this down to stage 19. But using that just specifically because they thought, well, that's the future. That's going to be the next big deal. And of course, it was the wrong format. But for one brief shining moment, it was the future.
I mean, it just shows you how much how on the cutting edge Jimmy Stewart's character was. He was not only had a laserdisc player on his plane, but he was recording custom, like single use videos for it.
It's just there's so much in this film that they seem to spend a lot. I can't imagine how much they had to reimburse the Navy and the Coast Guard for getting some of that equipment.
I was looking when they had that, I guess, one of the destroyers or whatever. I'm like, is that like archival footage, or did they really hire it?
So it felt to me like Top Gun's basically an advertisement for
a recruiting film. Yeah,
there's the kind of the text at the end where like this didn't really happen, but everything the Navy did was great, and they're all fantastic. Everyone, because once the Navy gets involved, nothing goes wrong.
If a plane is cooperative enough to sink in 100 feet of water, maybe we can get people out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they say that the procedures is like the standard submarine retrieval procedures, and as soon as the Navy gets involved, everything does go to plan. That's almost one of my problems with this film is nothing really seems to be a problem for very long. They're in dire circumstances, but everything they do, other than Christopher Lee getting knocked out and a few passengers not necessarily surviving the flood at the end, everything does kind of go to plan.
Right at the beginning. Yes, you hit him too hard, he's dead.
We'll have to do something about the security guard. He's going to be a problem.
That was a great
gas everyone.
Effect,
yeah, there's 3 people get the classic knocked out with the back of a gun to the head. One of them dies. But yeah, that like you don't see that anymore. It's a shame. I like that trope.
Yeah, shaking it off after you rub the back of your head and then shake it off and go back to flying the plane. I'm always amazed at Dulles Airport. I worked near and lived near Dulles Airport in Washington, and back in the 70s, it was pretty much as you see it, a mostly empty airport. People didn't go there because they were always flying into National Airport, which is closer to downtown DC. Dulles was where international flights flew, but there weren't many international flights coming out of there. And so they had a lot of spare time on their hands. And when you see both Airport 77 and Airport 75 being set at Dulles Airport, it's just amazing seeing this huge, empty, unused space, which they probably could film any weekday in the morning there, because there really was nothing going on out there. But now, if you go there, there's a midfield terminal and there's all kinds of things stacked on top of each other. Just a different world.
I went. We happened to be flying through Minneapolis a few years ago, and I actually went, and parts of it were still exactly the same as they were in airport. I think I sent you some photos from there.
Yeah, it's disturbing how little things have changed. I mean, they've added to other parts, but it's still the same thing. Although, it's amazing that we've lived through the 747 age. You can't fly, commercial on a 747. They're still used as freighters, but going as a passenger on board a 747 is a thing of the past now. But it was always looked on, even in the late 70s, as this is the future. This is modern. The only thing more modern would be the Concorde, which is why they had to make the sequel. All those days, every transatlantic flight I could think of back into the 80s and 90s was always on the 747. Before they started going with the 777s and things like that. But it was different. When you flew transatlantic, Mark, did you ever sit in the upstairs when it was converted to they got rid of the lounge, and then I know BA had a bunch that were just.
I
upstairs.
did, but I don't. Back in the 80s or even the 90s, I was flying coach, so no, I was in the back of the plane somewhere.
I had the kind folks at British Aerospace would sometimes, if I had a morning meeting, which I always scheduled, if I had a morning meeting, they'd let me fly business class so I could sit a little bit further up in the plane. But getting in the upstairs, it was very roomy because there were only maybe 8 to 10 rows, and they were just kind of scattered. So that was better than first class. No, they didn't fold out into beds, but it was for me, for a guy that was usually traveling coach, it felt like pure luxury. I don't think. Sorry,
I've been in premium economy once. That's the most. Where I just because it was a work thing where I had to have 2 suitcases of products with me, so the extra bag of the upgrade. That's it. I've never seen a staircase on a plane. That just feels wrong to me. There's stories to this thing. No, there's surely not.
I was on went to France from Dallas on a 380, which is the 2-story Airbus, and just the idea that we were sitting on the top floor and there was a whole nother plane worth of people underneath us just was really disturbing for 8 solid hours. It's amazing how much things have changed into you're basically you feel like you're in a DHL back of a DHL truck.
Yeah, even the top area now, it's just rows, throughout.
Yeah,
we're flying from Paris back to LA a couple of months ago, and there was a bathroom right next to the cockpit, and it was a long flight, 10 hours or so, and I guess that was supposed to be reserved for the flight crew, but nobody told me, so I used it, and all of a sudden somebody was trying to get in, and then I left, and then the next time I went by, the curtain was closed and a big sign said stay out or something like that.
This means you, Mark.
Yeah, exactly.
I used to work for British Aerospace, and we were a partner, one of the companies that formed Airbus. And I remember when they first started flying the 340s, the Airbus 340, one of the biggest problems they had was the plumbing was too narrow, and pretty frequently on long flights, half the lavatories would have to be shut down because they would just stop working. The pipes would freeze up. And I told my son that, and he was going on, I think it was on his honeymoon. They were going from Portland, Oregon down to Buenos Aires. And he got on the plane, and as he was looking around, he's like, oh my God, it's a 340. And he turned to his wife and he said, listen, trust me, if you have to use the bathroom, use it right now. So sure enough, they had shut down most of the labs, and there was a gigantic line forming in the plane for people just using the 2 remaining labs at the back of the plane for 300 people. Well, I guess we're a bit far afield from Airport 77.
Yeah, absolutely fine. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
Let's get back to it. Are there any standout characters for you both? For me, this is my first Jack Lemmon action film. I don't know how many he's done. I know he regretted doing this one.
Not a lot. I mean, I loved him for The Great Race. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. But he was such a great actor. Such a great actor.
Push the button, Max. Yeah. The button.
I loved seeing George Kennedy again. You know.
Yes.
He's just back then he was still in his prime and he looked great and you know.
all 90 seconds, I think they just dropped him in like on a bungee cord. It's like, here, you're in, George. Okay, you're back out. He's great. Mark, as when we finished the Airport Minute podcast, Mark got me an autographed picture of George Kennedy, so I have it framed. It says, "Thanks for being my pal, George Kennedy," and it hangs very proudly in my bathroom. Every morning while I'm shaving away, I can just give George the old thumbs up and be very thankful for Mr. Petroni.
Yeah. So after we recorded the previous podcast on the Airport franchise, one of the guys on that found that Kennedy had written a novel, and so I found it and bought it and read it, and it's not very good. I wouldn't recommend it. But it's terribly dated. He talks about like film producers. People accuse these film producers of doing all kinds of sexist things, and the women's just leave them alone and let them get on with it. There's that kind of dialogue in there. So
that didn't age well.
No, not terribly.
He has a great meta scene in an Albert Brooks film called Modern Romance, and it's George Kennedy playing George Kennedy, and he was talking about how he had been doing so many movies at Universal. He showed up at Universal one morning to get ready for makeup to go out into this movie, and then he found out that the film was being shot on the Fox lot, which was across town, and they had been holding production waiting for him to get there. But it's interesting seeing him talking about himself, and I don't know if the story was true or not, but it's if you want to see George Kennedy being his impression of George Kennedy, Modern Romance, I think it's about 1980-81, stars Albert Brooks and Catherine Harold.
I think in the book he wrote, he was the main character as himself in that as well. No, I think it was like a satire. I'm not going to. I can't remember the title. I'm not even going to. It's not recommended. But yeah, I was very happy to see Kennedy in it again, but not enough. This is the airport film that he's in the least.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of reversed that to not the best effect with Concord. But he's a pilot.
George Kennedy.
I love that he's worked his way up through the ranks of being like an engineer. I can't remember what he did in '75, but in this one he's a external contractor with plane knowledge, and then
I'm the liaison between the owner and the airline. Then he walks over to Jimmy Stewart. Let's go out and get some air. I guess that's what being a liaison is.
Yeah.
And they give him the option that we can send you out on the plane. You can be in the film more. And he's like, nah, I'll hang back. I'll zoom it in. Don't worry, it's fine. It's okay. We're thrilled that he's here. Sad that he's not in it.
He probably had a Celebrity Family Feud to be on that week, and just I gotta work my schedule.
But other than him and Jack Lemmon, any other standouts? Or
one of my favorite villains, Robert Foxworth, a man who he was he was great for being a bad guy. He's always he's a great bad guy in so many things. He was a good guy in there was a TV series in the 70s called Falcon Crest, and he was kind of like the head of a patriarch of a winemaking family in Napa Valley or something. But Robert Foxworth, he's always great as a turncoat. He's supposed to be the good guy, but he's actually the really big baddie. He was on a couple of episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, where he played an evil Klingon, an evil Vulcan, and he always gets his comeuppance, and he does get a very nice comeuppance in this movie. So he's very, very good at being distant.
Well, but it was great seeing Darren McGavin. I mean,
yes,
I never missed an episode of Kolchak, which is just one of my favorite. I haven't seen them since they went off the air, but I used to love him for that character.
And
he's good in anything he does.
Yeah,
I am less familiar with pretty much all of these actors than both of you. I have seen some older films, but not as many as either of you. So I apologize. Like Darren McGavin, I have seen him in A Christmas Story. I've seen that film once. I remember very little about it other than I liked his performance.
You must see The Night Stalker, the TV movie that he did. It was for many years. It was, I think, the highest rated TV movie. I mean, when it came out, it was about a vampire in Las Vegas, and super well done.
Okay.
Right, Jim, or would you just...
my mom is actually in an episode of The Night Stalker. She was. They were filming a scene on the Queen Mary, and she was out there with some travel agent. My mom worked for American Airlines, and she was out there with some travel agency group, and they were going over, I think, an early word processor or something. And they were having after they did their seminar on things, they went out to the Queen Mary, which was berthed out there in Long Beach, and they were filming The Night Stalker, and they needed a crowd scene. So they asked, would any of you like to be in this? And so somewhere my mom wound up in a line of people who were watching some, I don't know, like a murder investigation, a crime scene and things. And so she was in the crowd. We've watched it, and I've never been able to spot her in the thing. But yeah, that's our connection with The Night Stalker.
I'll add it to my list. But yeah, his character, Buchek, was one of my favorites in the film. Just because he's like he hurts his arm early on, so he's at a disadvantage. But he's just kind of the Walter Matthau kind of character, the hangdog assistant to Jack Lemmon. Just like he gets all the jobs to do and just looks grumpy and disgruntled and the whole time. I really bonded with that character for some reason. I liked Buchek a lot.
Which one was he playing? I'm sorry.
In Airport 77, he's Buchek. Darren McGavin.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I was thinking that sounds like Darren McGavin. I thought you might have been talking with somebody else, but yeah, it's just he's. It's amazing. I get the feeling all these people that were in the movie were there because they seem like they're all easy to work with. I don't think they had any prima donnas. I mean, even like Lee Grant is supposed to have been easy to work with. She got a lot of work during the 60s and 70s, even though she had such a despicable character.
She looked so mean.
Yeah. And she could out-mean Christopher Lee. Go figure.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, that may have me thinking he's going to be a bad guy, and then having him married to this creature, this monster of a human. Like you hear stories of when. Well, you may remember when you first saw it. Was there a cheer when she got knocked out?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I read stories about that.
One of the things, somebody that was famous back with us back in the 70s, Mark would remember Brenda Vaccaro, who plays Jack Lemmon's wife or fiance, whatever, girlfriend, something like that.
I love her.
Yeah. Yes, her suitor, whatever. But Mark, you must remember back in the 70s when Brenda Vaccaro used to do those feminine hygiene product commercials, and between every breath that she'd be saying a line, and then she'd inhale and she'd make this big sound, and it was she had this terrible rasp when she was doing these commercials. The commercials became so famous they did parodies of them on Second City Television. Andre Martin used to do an impression of Brenda Vaccaro, and
I don't remember that.
Okay, it's probably
I'm going to have to go to YouTube. They're on YouTube, yeah, I'm sure.
YouTube Brenda Vaccaro commercial, and it's just remarkable that this got past. It was back in the days before nonlinear editing, so they just kind of ran the audio through. But it was so bad that the company that was doing the commercials, I don't remember what the commercial was. It's some feminine hygiene product, but the commercial was so bad they actually went in and edited out the inhales that she had done because it was incredibly disturbing raspy sound.
Well, I used to do promos for Cinemax, and I used to go to 43rd Street, and there were like a ton of small audio studios where you'd go, they'd have an engineer, and then a voiceover announcer would come in and read whatever script you wrote. And I had a session with a very famous announcer, and then when we were playing it back during my editing session, he actually burped. He didn't actually completely burp, but it was coming up his throat. You could hear it. It was like, we're not using that one. Anyway, that's probably more than you wanted to know.
Absolutely fine. Now, Vaccaro did ads for Playtex.
Playtex, yes. Okay, yeah.
And she is still.
Yes, she's still with that. It's like.
She was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Wow. Oh, okay. I'll have to go back and rewatch. I didn't realize she was in there.
Yeah. Yes, wow. My wife and I hated Lee Grant's character in this. We assumed that the modern phrase of Karen was named after her character, so that's exactly what she's playing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just a horrendous person. Like her husband, Chris Willie, is going to go and save everyone, and she's like, "No, stay. Let's all die together." Like I just hated everything she did. Um, yeah,
I was impressed by the battery capabilities of a 747 because usually there are no batteries to run the lights on a 747. You have to start up a small engine in the back known as the APU that's in the tail. But for some reason they could do it in 100 feet of water. So,
I mean, they're in a plane that sank. The
yeah.
plane wouldn't sink. For
No.
this. I don't know. They're quite light. They
Yeah.
have to be.
Yeah. That Miracle on the Hudson thing, if you remember, that's a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so if we agree that the plane sank, then anything else is off the table.
Yeah.
I now understand why what you said earlier these actors would get cast to meet the SAG minimum. I hadn't considered that because the likes of Joseph Cotten, who is in a lot of like amazing films, has nothing to do here. He's a
Yeah.
like if you'd asked me like the most renowned have been in Citizen Kane and the Third Man, all these kinds of things, I would have put him very low down on that list, just because of how little he has to do.
Yeah. No, and well, I was wondering if Olivia de Havilland got him the job because they were both in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. They were both. She was the bad girl and he was the bad guy. So it's interesting seeing that. I'm sure they were. I'm sure they were swapping a lot of stories in between takes. They all looked like they were having a good time. It's one thing that you did get that feeling from this thing. Like they all knew each other and they all knew. And
of course, yeah.
Another day at the office.
Level, it's a small. Yep.
And there's a couple of small roles like there's when she sits down to play poker, Olivia de Havilland. One of the guys is like a art critic who has like 3 lines, but he's set up to being this major like, antagonist for her, and then does nothing all film. I don't even know what his character was or the actor or anything, but I thought like he was going to be so much more than he turned out to be. And there's a few of those.
There's a Tom Sullivan who was. He did a TV movie called If You Could See What I Hear. He was a blind guy who was a piano player, and that's in real, he had this very touching story, and he was on things like the Phil Donahue Show and stuff. They always told his story as being he had a child who had fallen in a pool and was drowning, and he couldn't see her, but he got down on his knees and listened at the pool to hear where the bubbles were and reached in and saved his daughter.
Wow.
So he has this amazing story behind him. So it's like, here he is in Airport 77, and then he's there for like 5 minutes, and then he gets crushed by a piano. It's like, oh, well, goodbye, Tom.
Killed doing what he loved.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Making movies.
Yeah, killed by this piano that's for some reason on a plane but not bolted down.
Yeah.
There we are.
Well, these things happen. Yeah. It's just fun seeing all these. I mean, there was this stunt casting idea in the 70s that's always fascinating that at the time it was timely, but nowadays you wouldn't know them from Adam who these people were. Like Mark and I were talking about Airplane when we were doing Airport, and if you watch the movie Airplane, the taxi cab that's left at the beginning and at the end of the movie, you see the passenger in the back, and the passenger in the back of the plane, the back of the taxi cab is a guy named Howard Jarvis, who audiences knew back in 1980. He had started a tax revolt in California with something called Proposition 13. So he was very famous for a very brief moment in history back then, but now it's like it's just some old guy in the back of a cab, and it doesn't matter who he is. But at the time, it was topical.
I think I've watched that thinking that's just some extra. That's just some guy that you look about. You can you have a suit. There you go. It's like when we talked about Concord in this other podcast. I had never heard of Charo before.
Oh,
okay. Just
No.
apparently someone noteworthy who was in this film, and I'm still not entirely sure what she did.
Yeah, she had her 15 minutes and then some, I think.
Yeah. Well, she was always on lots of game shows. She was famous for being basically a game show guest because she had that way of talking, and she knew how to play up the accent and all that. So
she was on the Tonight Show when I was a teenager, and with Sean Connery, and I was like, oh man, I wish I could have been there, And she just kept making like goofy statements,
Yeah, but that was her shtick, and they knew she could fill like we are nowadays. You're always looking for new content, so she could provide the content without a lot of back work.
Did Connery ever do any of these kinds of films? I feel like he would work in a disaster movie
He
context.
did Meteor.
Ensemble.
Meteor. There you go.
Okay.
American
Meteor.
International Pictures. Yeah.
Oh,
Which,
And Wrong is
yeah.
Right. Wrong is Right is
That's-
hardly
yeah.
I'm trying to think if he did.
Well, Meteor has somebody asked him about it, and apparently they ran out of money for the special effects. And Connery said it was pieces of flying on the screen.
I would definitely be watching this film.
Yeah, Meteor.
Oh, Cole Moulton.
5 miles.
Martin Landau, fantastic. Henry Fonda. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you have to see it. It's one.
I
of
mean,
those,
that's the thing. Even if it's a very bad movie, it had great people in it. People worked really hard to try to make it good.
Samuel Z. Arkoff. It was. It was a time and a place. I mean, back in the late 70s, Mark and I both watched a lot of bad movies back then, and I guess there's still.
We would go to movie theaters and then just start making comments and really annoying the people around us. I'll never forget. I think it was Voyage of the Damned, which to me is probably one of the worst movies ever made. Jim was making fun of it, and some woman turned around and said, "Excuse me, people are trying to watch this movie," and without missing a beat, Jim goes, "Really? Where are they?"
Yes, we were Mystery Science Theater before there was Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah, way before Mystery Science Theater.
But it was, it was before. Well, cable was barely on the horizon, so that's what you did. You went out to the movie and watched it once, and enjoyed it while you could. Mark and I have a favorite bad movie. We usually we still talk about the Robert Mitchum film, The Amsterdam Kill. I don't know if you've seen that.
That was bad.
No.
That was really bad. If there's an Amsterdam Minute, we're on it.
I mean, if there's not, you have to start it. That's the
Yeah,
rule.
it's Robert Mitchum ending the movie by chasing someone through a greenhouse in Amsterdam with a bulldozer, and he's trying to get the bad guy. Was it what's his face? The guy that was in Quantum Leap. Not Scott Bakula. The
Richard
Dean
Egan?
Stockwell. Dean Stockwell.
I'm looking at the
Dean
cast
Stockwell
now.
was the bad guy in this film, and he was. Robert Mitchum was trying to kill Dean Stockwell with a bulldozer through a bunch of greenhouses, big glass greenhouses. It was very entertaining, I have to admit. But it's all on that same. I think the golden age of really bad movies was toward the late 70s, which is this is right in the ballpark for it with Airport 77.
We've covered some lesser quality films on this show, but these days they tend to be almost intentionally bad. We've covered the likes of Ice Sharks and Shark in Venice, Santa Jaws,
Oh,
where it's
nah. I
I,
haven't watched any of this.
I'm not surprised.
Mark has a film coming up in a little bit. Can you talk about that yet, Mark, or where are you at with that?
Yes. So, I actually am in a movie that was directed by Sean Heights, who's a young up-and-coming director, and he and I co-wrote his next movie, which we're still looking for money to finish it. But in my head, growing up, I'm like, oh man, I want to produce a movie, and let me tell you, it's nothing like I thought it would be, and it's insanely hard work. And but so in Cannibal Comedian, I play a nightclub heckler who heckles the wrong comedian, and let's just say it's a pretty ugly ending for me. And then Area 5150, I play the patriarch of an inbred family. And it's just amazing, though. It's a lot of hard work, and everybody worked really hard. And 16, 17-hour days. And, I would stagger back to the hotel room and go, I don't know if I want to do this anymore.
I'm just scrolling down your IMDb, and unfortunately, I can't find anything Deep Blue Sea related. Nothing like aquatic. We could have you back on to cover.
Did you do any? Did you do any featurettes on anything? You did a featurette on Thunderball.
On Thunderball, the closest I did an interview with Raku Browning, who played the creature from the Black Lagoon, and then he became like one of Florida's top underwater coordinators. And he worked on Thunderball and Never Say Never Again, and he just had a lot of great stories. He just passed away, I think, a few months ago.
The Creature from Black Lagoon is on the short list of films to get to soon. I'm looking forward to revisiting that one.
It's wonderful. I think Jim and I, we can agree on that. That is a real fantastic film.
Yeah, I agree.
Gilman is perfect. Yeah, it's one of those ones that people talk about a lot, but it's odd how few people have seen it. It's really just the photography on it, especially underwater photography, it's pioneering. I mean, it's stuff we take for granted now, but being able to film all that stuff at the beginning of the aqualung era,
right.
It's amazing that they could, do that kind of cinematography underwater.
And they shot it. Usually everything's shot in Hollywood, but they went to Florida because the water was crystal clear, and they filmed in I think Weeki Wachee Springs or someplace, and and then if you watch the second two movies, the budgets got smaller and smaller, and it was all set like right around L.A.
Yeah.
I mean, we're familiar with that with Deep Blue Sea. The sequels, the project got smaller, and they moved to South Africa.
Yeah, once they can't afford Whit Bissell, it's over. That to me that's if you're watching a good 50s movie, if it has Whit Bissell in it, it's going to be wonderful. So
or Eliza Cook Jr.
Yeah. Who was the girl in Creature? Was Julia Adams?
Oh, Julia Adams. Yeah, Julia Adams, lovely.
Yeah, amazing thing. But the underwater stuff on that, it's just stunning how they could manage to do that. And he's covered in this whole giant latex suit underwater with an air hose and stuff, and they were filming extended shots.
He told a funny story that they were filming, and it was cold for whatever reason, and he was getting cold, so the crew began giving him scotch or whiskey to keep him warm. And he said, I was so drunk, they had to stop filming, because he couldn't do anything.
I was thinking about that watching Christopher Lee floating up in Airport 77. I couldn't figure out if they did that it had to have been in a tank. If you watch the bubbles, this is one way. I mean, here's some secrets of movie making. If you watch the bubbles in a movie and the bubbles are very tiny, they're actually shooting in salt water, which is how you can look. If you look at Thunderball, it's all salt water. There's very small bubbles. But I'm pretty sure Airport 77 was shot in like a tank at Universal or something because the bubbles are really big. But somewhere they had to get Christopher Lee down to the bottom of the water, and they shot a lot of his, those underwater scenes where he had to like act dead and float around inside the cabin. That's I'd be pretty scared from an insurance point of view of, here you've got a not too young Christopher Lee underwater, and you've got they probably had other divers and stuff standing around ready to slap a respirator on him to make sure he's breathing. But then he's got to act dead for a while until somebody waves cut at him. But pretty scary stuff.
I mean, that's nothing compared to his real life in the years prior to that. So he's seen some things as Christopher Lee.
Yeah. For sure.
That was a pleasant afternoon for him, pretending to be dead underwater for a while, I'm sure.
Nice and cool and just relaxing, yeah. It's Mark, you've been, we've both been to in Paramount, the Paramount tank out there in the parking lot. And I don't think that's
where Moses parted the Red Sea.
Yeah, and it's also where Captain Kirk wound up in that Klingon ship at the end of Star Trek 4. But it's funny when you go there because it takes them 5 days to fill up the water. But in the meantime, it's great. It's a great parking space in the middle of Paramount. So it's just kind of weird that you pull into this.
Parking's a premium in LA, that's for sure.
So you just drain the Red Sea and park your car there. But always
hope they don't unpart it whilst you're there.
Yeah. They always says when in Hollywood visit Universal Studios, but really go see the Paramount lot because the tank is right there in the front.
Nice.
Wow.
So I read that when Airport 77 was on TV, they made it like a 2-part event and they filmed 70 minutes of extra footage. Have either of you seen that unreleased TV cut with a bunch more character development and more? I think there's a lot of deleted scenes and some stuff with Lee Grant shot just for the TV version.
Oh my God!
More hating on Lee Grant. Wow. No, I wonder if it's on the. I wish it's on the DVD. I have the DVDs.
It's not on mine.
Okay, I'll have to look at my collection. But yeah, I haven't seen them. I'm sure Ernie Anderson was doing the voiceovers Airport 77 when it's released in the U.S. on ABC. The voice that they always had was a great voiceover actor named Ernie Anderson, and did you ever work with him, Mark? I don't know if you ever had him on.
No, I didn't.
He has this great basso profundo voice, and that like whenever they showed Jaws once a year on television, it's like, and now Jaws, and the voice was so down the lower registers. It was like, oh, I got to stay and watch this because Ernie told me to.
Even though I've seen it, I'm watching it again.
Yeah. So he'd make you want to watch Airport 77. But wow, no, I'll have to see. There must be deleted scenes floating somewhere in the internet.
There's a few online, but apparently the extra 70 minutes have never been released anywhere. So it's
there's probably a reason for that.
Yeah, I say it was mostly deleted scenes, the stuff that they didn't want in the first place.
I do remember I was out in LA in 1980, and one of the rides. It's in between a ride and a show. It's the stunt show that they had was based around Airport 77, and what they do is they'd show a clip from the movie, and they'd have something where they'd take a couple of people out of the audience and dress them up in like scuba gear and things like that, and they'd film them with a video swimming through a tube or things like that, or then they get to the part of the movie where they were jumping into the boats on the as they were being rescued, and so they film jumping out of an airplane door. But that was it's amazing the crowds that they had for that, and they still have a stunt show at Universal. I just don't think they take as many audience participants because of
legal.
Just the sheer liability. But back then they'd throw you out of a plane into the water. It's like, let's give everybody a big round of applause for Judy here, who wanted to be a part of this.
My sister got to pretend she was on an escalator in an earthquake, I think, when we visited one such ride at some point. Yeah.
Mm.
So there's photos of her 10 years old pretending to fall off an escalator. So jealous I didn't get picked. Can't have it all.
Wow.
So the only other character the main character we've not really talked about is Jimmy Stewart as Philip Stevens. I thought this was like way late in his career. Not really. I mean, it's not in his peak, but he still had like quite a lot of acting to do after this. It's only 5 years after Harvey, I think. No, that can't be right. No,
he could have. Harvey was 1995.
I saw him on Broadway in Harvey.
Really?
Early 70s. Yeah, early 70s.
Really?
That's
Still
it.
doing
Yes,
Harvey then?
It was 5 years after he did it on stage. That's what it was.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep.
But
and he was wonderful.
Because judging by his performance
I remember him
here,
outside the stage door, just signing programs, just standing there, tall man in a suit, just signing.
Did you get one?
No, I didn't.
It
wasn't Sean Connery. I didn't care.
Well, you had Monty Python. I remember that one that you had.
Yes.
Monty Python Live.
If you know where it is, please tell me.
Okay, yeah. My favorite thing about when you went to Monty Python Live was I remember I think it was Terry Gilliam had signed it first, and he wrote 2, and he wrote Matthew, and he crossed it out, and he wrote Luke, and he crossed it out, and he wrote John, and he crossed that out, and he wrote Mark.
Yes, yes.
Off the spur of the moment, right, doing that on an autograph was impressive.
Pretty...
Wow, Jimmy Stewart. It's amazing. He was a 1-star general. He was an Eagle Scout. He was he rose up through the ranks in the middle of World War II when he could have had, he could have gotten a deferment and things like that, and he went and he continued on with the Air Force with the reserve. He was fun. I mean, when you watch movies like Strategic Air Command, he actually flew a B-36. He also flew the B-57 Hustler. I mean, this guy was flying jets when he was 45 and still in the reserves and a general officer in the United States Air Force. So, and he's still making movies. I mean, just not a slacker. That guy.
Well, then I will retract any negative thoughts I have for his performance in Airport 77. He's great.
Well, he did what he could with what he had.
Yes.
He's picking up a few dollars.
He checked that box, and he's got the hospitalization for the year.
The Bentley's not going to pay for itself.
The final line of Benji, I'm your grandpa. He puts a lot of. I can't do a Jimmy Stewart voice. He puts a lot more emotion in that line than he has the rest of the film, I guess. But as you say, there's not a lot to work with. So he does what he can.
I was unsure why they had him in the movie, except hey, we can get Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
So
it's probably that he was available, and who's in it? Oh, Olivia and Joseph Cotten, sure.
Yeah, they'd all go to the commissary at lunch at Universal. Universal has a nice big commissary, so it's like they probably just sat down and chatted away. It's like, oh, do you want us back? Okay.
Yeah.
3 lines and go on to the next one. Then they all had to like. I'm trying to imagine what it was like being the guy that ran the hydraulics on the water when they were cranking up the flooding scene. It's like don't drown Joseph Cotten. This is
right.
Number 1 rule.
These are the list of people you can
maybe
drown.
Maybe it was the same
These are the
guy
ones
from
you
the
can't.
Towering Inferno.
Yeah.
Right? Remember they blew up the tanks on the roof?
Yeah.
I remember watching a making of, which back then was very rare. They'd be on TV and they're like, and now we will tie in Mr. Newman. We're tying down Paul Newman for this scene.
Don't drown Robert Vaughn. Don't drown Robert Vaughn. You can't do it. Actually, had he fallen off the elevator at that point? I can't remember. Doesn't matter. That's a different film. I would really like to see the longer TV cut of this, just because one thing I think the original Airport better film than 77. I think it's fair to say.
A bit.
It was nominated for Best Picture. This one wasn't. It's one. It has an unofficial Razzie. It was the Razzies mean nothing. They're terrible things. But just the fact that all the Airport sequels were given honorable Razzies is kind of mean. I think.
Oh, that's no. You got to understand what the purpose of them was for. It's not for high art. It was for entertaining the populace.
Absolutely.
I mean, their biggest mistake in Airport 77 was they brought back George Kennedy, but they completely forgot about John Finlater. He was our buddy. John Finlater was he played the transglobal. He's kind of like a lackey for the.
Right, he would drive the cart around the airport.
Yeah, Peter.
With, what was her name?
With Helen Hayes. Ada
Helen
Hayes.
Yeah. Well, that's it.
Yeah.
So in that first one, as you guys well know, there are lots of story strands going on at the same time. So you've got the bomber on the plane and all of his family life and the insurance. You've got the plane with the bomb on it and Mrs. Guantzit on there. And you've got Joe back at the airport trying to clear the runway. All of these different things going on. Whereas in 77, you just kind of have the one thing.
Yeah, there's the A story and nothing else. Yeah.
Once,
I mean, they were trying to liven it up, but it was going nowhere. Like they had the artwork that there was the heist going on, and of course the heist fails, and then we forget about the paintings. Are they going to save all these Rembrandts and things that are going to the bottom of the sea? Is that part of the?
Yeah, they
forgot about
it, right?
I would. Yeah, I mean they'll do like a Beyond the Poseidon adventure and go down and try to rescue them now.
Yeah,
get Telly Savalas.
Well, you can get another Rembrandt, I guess.
Yeah. So
the ones that are left are more valuable now. So.
Yeah.
That's
supply and demand.
I just wanted. There could have been more plots going on inside of the plane. I mean, you had the Wallaces, like Chris Lee dying and Karen being annoying, and you had Jimmy Stewart's daughter being estranged, but there's not really any tension there. She's like not sure if she's going to meet him, and then she's going to meet him. There's no real sense of what's going to happen because it's all going to be fine.
Which
is a shame.
And all the right people got killed at the end. Yeah, I mean, pretty much. There were a couple of sad ones like Tom Sullivan, but for Christopher Lee, who would have thought? But
the first to die. The first to go.
Well, no, actually, I think Tom Sullivan did get smushed first. Yes. Yeah,
and a couple of the hijackers.
Olivia's maid or whatever, her sidekick.
Dorothy, her friend,
Dorothy,
But I mean, the little girl had
Olivia
to survive. So,
Olivia made it out.
As long as Olivia survived.
What was Olivia de Havilland's last film? Do you remember, Mark? That might have been.
I don't. But we can.
I mean, I know she was doing like Murder, She Wrote, and things like that. But I didn't know if she was doing any.
IMDb says The Woman He Loved in 1988 TV movie.
Okay.
Not non-TV movie would be The Fifth Musketeer.
The Deadly Swarm.
79.
Deadly. Oh, I remember Deadly
The Swarm was 78. Yeah.
Swarm. Yeah. Oh, there you go. She had a great career, but plus she. I mean, I think her husband was a publisher of Paris Match. I mean, all I know is she had an amazing brownstone in central Paris. So I don't think she had to worry about her SAG medical.
No, well, she's got the national health.
Plus, she had obviously the best genes in the world, 103.
Yeah.
Oh, born in Tokyo.
Yep. Yeah. Quite a life. She has what was the name of her book? Every Frenchman Has One. Is that what the?
Yes, Every French. Yeah, I have a copy of that somewhere.
Yeah, it's very, very funny book. If you want to read a really good, she has just a bunch of short essays in there about what it's like living in France and just what pretty much non-actor things about her life and her children and being just her world. But she had a very upbeat look on life, and she did love her champagne. That's good.
Yes,
with ice in it.
By the way,
champagne with ice.
For the listeners of this podcast, the secret to a long life, as told to me by Olivia, was a glass of pink champagne every night. So try that, and then get back to us in like 25 years and let us know.
If you're not here to come back to us in 12 years, you didn't do it right.
Right.
Not enough champagne.
Exactly.
Well, my only other notes are films were slower in the 70s, but that's fine. Because you see, during the setting up of the hijack, you have the guy you see every second of him stuffing his face with the foam and putting on the disguise, and then going onto the plane and unscrewing the cable and then screwing in the gas cannon. It's a very long. There's a long silent sequences, like when they're underwater and they're setting up the balloons. There's long stretches of silence, which is fine, which is great. I have no problem with that. It's just if this was made today, you would cut back inside to somebody making a joke. Hey, look what he's doing up there.
Yeah. Well, even the crash, the way that special effect of the 14-foot long plane bouncing along the water, it kept going up and down and up, and it's like, crash already, please. We get the idea. You're not going to make it.
And like the whole plot of the film is the plane's going to go in the water and go under, and it takes like half the film for it to get there, which again is fine. But I feel like today most of the film would be in that underwater section.
Yeah.
But times change.
Watch Tom Cruise movies, and they'll get a better idea of how to do it.
There we go.
No, I noticed there was a complete lack of split screen, which was majorly prevalent in the original Airport. I was surprised. To me, that was almost like the style of Airport was that Woodstock Brady Bunch style of multiple things happening on the screen, and that there was no simultaneity at all in Airport 77. But of course, that would have cost opticals. Yeah. So.
Not even during the phone calls, which is where you would classically see that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, I guess, on the lowest budget possible, but it kept Lou Wasserman happy, so they did good.
Oh, they stole his Laserdisc player. I had to keep him happy. So we've been through all of my notes, other than the quote, "Stop talking and hold me." I don't think I can do two things at once. It's something I liked. Did you guys have anything else you want to talk about Airport 77? Anything we didn't cover?
Oh, I think we beat it into the ocean.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm always amazed at is it's so refreshing, old school. In the middle, I mean, this came out. Star Wars was out. Annie Hall was out. This was after Jaws,
but no sharks. No sharks. What's going on?
Yeah. They did mention the Bermuda Triangle, and the Bermuda Triangle was supreme hot topic in the late 70s. Everybody had a book out, paperback about all the different, and then Close Encounters was coming out the next year, which was about pieces of the Bermuda Triangle. So it's just this funny little no budget film that was going on while they were filming Close Encounters at Universal. Well, no, Columbia was doing. Did Universal have a blockbuster back then in 77? I can't think of one. Because Columbia did...
Earthquake was 75, right?
Yeah.
Who did Tsunami? Remember that? That was the giant tidal wave movie.
Yeah, that was. I think that was a little later. I think that was 78. But I don't think Universal had any big I don't think they had a big movie in 77.
They had
Roller Coaster,
Sorcerer, Slapshot.
Oh, Sorcerer.
Which
Sorcerer was 76.
If you haven't seen Slapshot, you must. It's great. Yeah. Paul Newman's favorite role.
I've seen
and our favorite, Jim, the Choir Boys.
The Choir Boys. Pull that train. Yeah.
Smokey and the Bandit.
Yep.
That was like a fairly low-budget movie that made a ton of money.
Yeah. That was the trick. But Universal took quite a downturn, I think, after that. In 79, 80, they were really not. Of course, they didn't sink themselves like United Artists did with Heaven's Gate. But they were just kind of like slogging along with a lot of TV movies. They sunk a lot of money into Battlestar Galactica the following year on the TV side, and they lost big on that. But they were doing things like they did a remake of Maxwell Smart. They were doing Get Smart, and then Xanadu right after that, following up.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, so it was just a pile of things that weren't working for them. But this, they did make money on this. I know this was not a big winner, but wasn't it like the 11th largest thing of the year? I can't remember what they made some money off of it.
So maybe the writer got paid. Who knows?
Well, if that's so, if discussed about 77, I have a couple of features to get to the end of the show. First up, how is this film similar to Deep Blue Sea? Just got to tie it into the podcast.
So unrealistic underwater action that gets crazier as the movie moves on. I would say that.
Well,
would be
I have a little list. So that there is a singer in the cast, because LL Cool J is in Deep Blue Sea, and this one has Tom, the pianist. There's a helicopter in it. There's a rich guy on an airplane.
Samuel L. Jackson would have been perfect if he dropped into this. Wow.
He would have been like 12.
There's an exposition of the facility that they're in scene and a map, which is I always love seeing a map of the kind of thing they're trapped in, and which includes a kitchen or the galley. There's a Star Wars prequel cast member. A bit tenuous, but Sam Jackson, Christopher Lee.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Scenes in a radio tower. The room's filling with water. There's water pouring down the stairs. Jack Lemmon talks sternly to his girlfriend, much like Carter does to Scoggins at one point. They're wading through a flooded corridor. A doctor more used to dealing with animals. Sharks, tortoises, same thing. There's a dripping ceiling. They have difficulty opening doors. They open a hatch to escape. Where's my other list?
I think there might even be a short. I think there was somebody mentioning that do they like their job in this, or do they want to keep their job? I think there may have been something like that in Airport 77. I can't remember where.
It sounds about right, yeah. And there's a rich guy talking about his diving experience. And they plan to land at St. George's Island on a disused World War II runway, and Aquatica is a disused World War II submarine refueling platform. So
perfect.
Oh my God. Okay. Somebody's done their research.
Yeah.
So at this point in the show, my various recorders decided one decided it wasn't going to work the entire show, and my backup recorder at this point decided it was going to record intermittently, basically making the rest of the show a confusing mess of recordings here and there. And whilst I do have a separate track of just me for the rest of the show, you would have like 2 minutes of me going, yeah, which isn't a lot of good, not very coherent. So I'm just gonna apologies to Jim and Mark. I'm just gonna fill in the rest of the show and explain what happened. So I've just done the Deep Blue Sea adjacent. How Airport 77 is Deep Blue Sea. How deep and how blue is it? Well, I explained to Mark and Jim the process of what I do with these films, which is working out roughly on average how deep the action is at any given point in the film, and then how blue the screen is throughout the entire thing, like a normal person does and everything. It's like normal. I'm a normal person. I consulted Jim as to his guidance as to how high he believed the planes were flying at any given point, because I didn't know. and he has more experience with these kinds of plane things and what height they fly at. And so between us, we determined that it's probably flying at about 2,600 feet in the air, so about 7,900 meters. So that's what I went with. And we guessed they're probably about 20 meters, 60 feet ish deep when they're under the water. So that averaged out to a height of 1,728 meters up in the air, which is 5,500 feet. Significantly less deep than Deep Blue Sea. And about 14.5% blue. Not a terribly blue film. There's some underwater stuff that's blue, but not a lot. So that means that on our graph, Airport 77 is in blueness. It is bluer than the Poseidon Adventure, less blue than Santa Jaws, and height-wise, it is our third highest film. It is higher than Con Air, which we have never actually covered on this show, but I did the DWC ranking over on Con Air, the podcast, and just a little bit lower than Cliffhanger, which then led to Mark saying Cliffhanger was, I'm not sure if it was the only, but one of the few films that he has walked out of, which surprised me, given that Cliffhanger is a pretty great film, and would recommend that he go and see it. And I suggest that he should, because they managed to make a fist fight between Sylvester Stallone and John Lithgow seem believable and important. I didn't even mention it was on a helicopter dangling off the edge of a cliff. So, great film. Then it came to the plugs section of the show. Mark has a documentary on HBO Max, or just Max, or HBO, or whatever they're calling it these days, I don't know, called The Joe Karoff Story. That's Caroff. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. So check that out. And Jim is, of course, the host of many Movies by Minutes podcasts, including Apollo 13 Minute, Airport Minute, of course, with Mark. The Rocketeer Minute, which I think I've mentioned on the regular show a few times, where they actually had the Rocketeer himself, Billy Campbell, became like the third host, like a guest host for like a third of their shows, which is a very, very impressive thing to do. As mentioned on the show, Jim very good at finding unusual guests or people who are potentially related to the films. I don't think he got Timothy Dalton on, which is a shame. So there we are. The Rocketeer, a wonderful film. And Jim has also been the guy in charge of the various Movies by Minutes group projects. Mark and I have partaken in the likes of Bowfinger, Silverado, and The Best Years of Our Lives Minute. We were not active as segment movie podcasters for Die Hard Minute or North by Northwest Minute, but Jim produced those as well, and there is a seventh project, because he did Colour by Night. There is a seventh MXM group project coming later this year, early next year, for which currently we know that it is a popcorn film that is in colour. That is all he's willing to say, other than people will like this film. It's for his fans, so looking forward to seeing what that is. As for me and regular co-host Mark Hoffmeyer, you can find everything Mark does over at Movies, Films and Flicks. You can find Mark and I talking about Con Air over on Con Air the podcast. If you're a fan of plane films, as you may be from listening to this episode, then we did Con Air scene by scene. A whole bunch of chapters. Jim was a guest on that one to help us talk about that. And you can find my stuff over at lifeversusfilm.com. You can follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and various other social medias whose names change at Deep Blue Sea Pod. Next week, I think Mark should be back for the Deep Blue scenes of Jurassic Park 3, all being well. If we can't get Mark back for that one, then it might be the next Pirates of the Caribbean film with Nick Rehack. Who knows? The Dead Man's Chest. Those are two shows coming up soon. But as for Airport 77, thank you once again to my guests, Mark Cerulli and Jim O'Kane. I've been Jake Lewis, and I'll Deep Blue see you next week.